Oh my God, it's working. Okay. So the airspaces. Can everybody see it all right? Yes, no, maybe so. Anyone?
It looks good.
Barely there yet.
All right. Okay. So the National Airspace System. So we've got two different types, well, three different types of airspaces over the United States. We've got controlled airspace. So when we're talking about controlled airspace, we're talking about class A, B, C, D, and E. So they're just general use areas. And then the second type of airspace we have is uncontrolled airspace. And this is known as Class G airspace. So Class G airspace, basically there's really no restrictions. Well, there are, but there are very few restrictions with Class G airspace. Basically, they just want to make sure that you're not being completely stupid. You know, you're not skimming Bear Lake with your tires, or you know, flying 10 feet above the highway. Stuff like that. They want you to be careful still, but so there's a couple of restrictions, but for the most part, it's uncontrolled, free game, do whatever you want, go do barrel rolls, loop-de-loos, whatever. And then you've got special use airspace. So special use airspaces would be something like an air show. Basically, it's special activities that must be contained. So let's look at this. So we've kind of skimmed the surface with the National Airspace System. So when we look at the different classes of airspace, we've got Class A. Class A airspace, which is from flight level 180 to flight level 600. Then you have Class E space, airspace that fills everything in between. Basically below that 18,000 feet. Everything in between's pretty much just Classi Air Space. Then Class G airspace will go anywhere from the surface to 700 feet, or in some areas 1,200 feet above the ground. So Class G airspace is pretty small as far as like altitude goes, but it covers anything that's not designated Class A, B, C, D, or E, or special use. Then we have Class B airspace. So Class B airspace is, like I said before, it is the most, next to Class A airspace, it's the most controlled airspace. So this is one where you have like the big airports, Salt Lake International, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth. Any of those major airports where you have a lot of traffic and they need to keep everybody sequenced coming into the runway. So this is where you're going to have, you know, approach, departure, and then like ground and different types of air traffic controllers talking to you while you're in this airspace. Class C airspace, once again, it's towered. It's got a tower that's directing the traffic in the immediate area. And like it shows here, it's just kind of like that two-tier cake. So it expands over the area a little bit more to help with arriving and departing aircraft, sequencing them out of the terminal environment. But then you have Class D airspace, which is just, it's a cylinder of airspace over an airport. So once again, these are typically towered for a couple hours a day. You know, they'll have a controller kind of helping guide airplanes in and around. But not a whole lot of restrictions in Class D airspace. So Class D airspaces can be towered or non-towered. Sometimes we see them non-towered, but yeah. So it's important to know that there's controlled and uncontrolled. The only type of uncontrolled airspace is Class G. And then we'll go over some of the specifics of each one of these classes. So you need to know some of the specifics for each one of these classes of airspace, whether that's equipment required on the aircraft or separation requirements, or one of a couple other things. So Class A airspace, like I said before, it's generally from 18,000 feet up to and including 60,000 feet. So pretty much anywhere you're going to see commercial aircraft flying, that's going to be Class A airspace, unless they're coming into an airport. And MSL, that just means mean sea level. So that's above sea level. It was kind of funny. I was talking to my wife the other day. We live right in the approach path of Salt Lake International Airport for 34 left. And so we get a lot of commercial airplanes flying over our house during the day. And there's a couple times where she's like, oh my gosh, that airplane is so low. And I'm like, well, he's at least 6,100 feet above the, or 6,100 feet above sea level. And she stopped and she's like, how do you know where sea level is? Like, we're not at sea level. I said, honey, they've got an altimeter, they've got an instrument that reads their altitude above sea level in the airplane. It's okay. 6,100 feet, they're still like 2,100 feet above the ground here. So it's just like, it's okay. Nothing to worry about. But she was just completely flabbergasted that airplanes knew how high they were above sea level. She always thought that it was only above ground level. So kind of fun. But anyways, this includes the airspace over waters within 12 nautical miles of the coast. So talking about the lower 48 in Alaska. That's another term that you guys are going to see a lot throughout aviation is contiguous United States. The 48 contiguous, that's just the lower 48. All operations in Class A Class A airspace are conducted in instrument flight rules. There are absolutely no VFR aircraft allowed in Class A airspace. The equipment that you're required to have on board, you have to have a two-way radio, a radar beacon transponder, or Mode C transponder. So the radar beacon transponder, we refer to it as Mode C transponder. Those are the only requirements as far as actual equipment on board. Class A airspace, you're going to see in route charts for. Those are the high and low charts that we've looked at. Yeah, and then DME is required for anything above flight level 240 or 24,000 feet. Really what you need to know about Class A airspace, what you need to actually understand is just the altitude, 18,000 feet to 60,000 feet. So make note of that. Mode C requirements. So Mode C, that radar beacon transponder, you're going to be required to have that on board when you're in Class A, B, or C aircraft, or Class A, B, C airspaces, or when you're overflying B or C airspaces. They need to know how high you are at all times, because they're trying to sequence aircraft through the area, and if they don't know how high you are and you're over those, congested areas like that, it's a bad day. It's how mid-airs happen. Anytime you're within 30 nautical miles of Class B airspace, you are required to have a Mode C as well. So from the surface upwards. So don't really have to worry about it at or below 2,500 feet AGL. And we'll kind of show you why. So the Mode C transponder, if you look up in the top right corner, you can see that instrument with the 4 numbers. This is what I was talking about yesterday. Air traffic control will give you a 4-number code. Each aircraft has a specific code. And when you tune that in, there's a little button there that says ident. And when you push that button, you flash big on their radar screen. Once you flash big on their radar screen, it also makes sure that your tag is appropriate on their radar screen, telling them what kind of airplane you are, all that stuff. And that's how they know your altitude and everything. So this diagram below just kind of shows you where that Mode C transponder is required. Basically, anything that's in the dark blue, you're required to have that Mode C transponder. So this just talks about the IFR altitudes and flight levels. Referring to FAR 91.179. If you are below 18,000 feet, you fly odd thousands from 0 to 179, and then even thousands, 180 to 359. If you're 18,000 feet to 29,000 feet, same thing. And then 29 to 40. You can see that there's a larger interval. It's a 4,000 foot separation. So you can see that everything up to 29,000 feet, they want you at 2,000 foot intervals if you're going the same direction. And at 29,000 feet to 40,000 feet, they want you at 4,000 foot intervals. Now, there's a special exemption to that 4,000 feet, and you can see that at the bottom of the note. It says does not apply to RVSM airspace flight level 290 to 410. So we're going to talk about RVSM airspace. RVSM airspace stands for Reduced Visual Separation Minimums. That might be something you want to write down. Reduced vertical separation minimums. So RVSM, air traffic control separates aircraft by a minimum of 1,000 feet vertically between flight level 290 to 410 inclusive. So this is only aircraft that fall from in that 290 to 40, so 29,000 feet to 41,000 feet. They can separate you by 1,000 feet. So you revert back to this neon sweeping that we have talked about. Okay, RVSM airspace, cruising altitudes. Once again, if you are on a magnetic course from 0 to 179, you fly at odd flight levels at 2,000 foot intervals again. And then magnetic course 180 to 360. Actually, that's supposed to say 359. That is not 360. 180 to 359, you fly at even 2,000 foot intervals. So when we say odd and even, we're meaning 29,000 feet, 31,000 feet, 33,000 feet, 35,000 feet, 37,000 feet, 39,000 feet, and 41,000 feet. When we're talking about even flight levels, 30,000, 32, 34, 36, 38, and 40,000 feet. So, yeah. These flight levels, an easy way to remember them is the way that I have said a couple hundred times already. Neod Sweden. So north, due north going east to 179, you're flying odd. So neod, and then south, due south 180, flying west up to 359, you're in even. So southwest, Sweden. So this just kind of shows you the separation between aircraft. RVSM airspace is special qualification airspace. The FAA must approve the operator and the aircraft used by the operator for RVSM airspace. The aircraft must be RVSM qualified. So what is RVSM qualified? The equipment that is required on board the aircraft is an autopilot, operational altitude alerting system has to be operational. So your autopilot has to be operational, your altitude alerting system has to be operational, and then your altitude reporting transponder, mode C, right? Your air data computers, you have to have 2 of them operational, and then 2 primary altimeters. So all of that has to be operational. You can see where it says altitude reporting transponder. There's 2 to the left. Only one of them has to be operational. But you have to have 2 on board. Basically, the dispatcher's role to make sure that we can operate in RVSM airspaces, we just have to make sure that the MELs, or minimum equipment list, we've got to make sure that all of those things are working that we showed you in this list are working. All of those requirements. So 1 autopilot, 1 altitude reporting transponder, 2 air data computers, and 2 primary altimeters. All of those have to be working. Oh, and then your mode S transponder. So we're, yeah, altitude alerting system, sorry. And then we just have to make sure on that air traffic control strip that I showed you guys that it has the appropriate suffix on there, that it's RVSM qualified. The crew and air traffic control procedures for severe weather or required component fails in RVSM is found in AIM 469. So all it's saying is if something happens in RVSM airspace, if we refer to the AIM section 469, we can see what we need to do in the event of whether it be severe weather or if one of our components fell. So again, not super important, some of the stuff that's on there, but the important thing to take away from RVSM airspace is the equipment requirements. Make sure that you have those written down, and you guys can go back to this PowerPoint presentation. This is on your Google Drive. You guys can go back and refer to this, but you have to have the autopilot, altitude alerting system, altitude reporting transponder, 2 air data computers, and 2 primary altimeters. Make sure that you know those, and then make sure that you know the flight levels for RVSM airspace. So 290 to 410. All right. So Class B airspace. Class B airspace, surface to 10,000 feet or 12,000 feet within a 20 nautical mile radius. This surrounds the busiest airports configured to each. So like if we look at Salt Lake International at the airspace, the Class B airspace over that, due to mountainous terrain, you can see that the Class B airspace is altered slightly just because of the terrain. So that's pretty much it. The standard, though, is that 3-tiered wedding cake, upside down wedding cake. So just the important thing to remember there is that it's from the surface to 10,000 feet typically. Very few times do we see it extend higher. You need ATC clearance prior to entry and departure from this airspace. So you actually have to call in to air traffic control and let them know, hey, or request. You can't even let them know that you're going to be flying into it. You have to request it, and they have to authorize it before you can even fly into Class B airspace. The weather, when it talks about this 3 statute miles clear of clouds, we're not going to worry about that too much. It's just talking about, like, where do we need to fly? That's pilot crap. We don't need to know. As dispatchers, the pilots are the only ones. When it comes to cloud layers, all we care about is, do we need an alternate, or are we legal to dispatch the flight? Other than that, we don't care about all the specifics about, you know, dodging clouds or whatever. Doesn't matter in our world. The equipment that we need to have operable on board is a 2-way radio, and then a mode C transponder once again. And we have to have VOR operable as well. And that's only if we're using IFR, so instrument flight rules. But there's an exception to that, and that's with prior permission, as always. You can always break rules, you just have to have permission from the FAA to do that. So the max speed, once again, is 250 knots. If we're in that underlying, meaning that we're flying underneath one of these wedding cake tiers that you see here, if we're flying underneath one of those wedding cake tiers, 200 knots. Anything below 10,000 feet, regardless of where we're at, 250 knots. But yeah. Oops. All right. The pilot certification, you have to be a private pilot to fly through Class B airspace, or you have to have a student endorsement, very minimum. So, like when I was doing my flight training after I soloed, you know, flying by myself, basically I had authorization once I received my solo certification, that student endorsement. I had authorization to enter Class B airspace by myself at that point. Charts that you have to have on board. You have to have a sectional chart, IFR, en route, low altitude chart, and a Tact chart. So this is kind of what the Class B airspace will look like on your sectional charts. Remember, sectional means that it's a visuals, like it uses visual flight rules. So that's the only chart that we're going to see these airspaces on. You'll see them on the low charts as well, but they won't be as defined as they are in the sectional charts or the Tact charts. When we talk about Tact charts are only the area over the airport. So You can see the different shelves on the left side here. You can see that it's identifying where the Class B, where those wedding cake tiers are. So in the dead center, you see SFC to 10,000 feet. So surface to 10,000 feet directly over the airport inside that circle. The next tier starts at 2,300 feet and extends up to the 10,000 feet. The next tier, 3,000 feet, extending up to 10,000 feet. And then you can kind of see the circle has two handlebars there that stick out. That tier is 4,000 feet to 10,000 feet. But then there's little tiers on the very outside, 7,000 feet to 10,000 feet, and then there's a little section that's 6,000 feet to 10,000 feet. So you've just got to pay attention to where you're at around Class B airspaces, making sure that you're not breaching the Class B airspace when you're flying. Once again, the important things to know about Class B airspace, the 250 knots, that's what's really important. The next thing that I would say important on the importance scale is the max speed of 250 knots. And that's pretty much all you need to know about Class B airspace. Class C airspace. So Class C airspace extends from the surface to 4,000 feet above sea level. I don't think that's right. That's not right. That's supposed to be AGL, not MSL. Because Provo Airport, Ogden Airport, they're both Class C airspace. I think Provo's been upgraded to Class C. Anyways, I know Ogden Airport is Class C, and I know that Ogden Airport also sits above 4,000 feet MSL, so this has got to be wrong. So I apologize for that. It's not 4,000 feet MSL, it's 4,000 feet AGL. It's a 5 nautical mile radius from 4,000 feet AGL, or from the surface to 4,000 feet AGL. And then there's a 10 nautical mile tier that's 12,000 feet to 4,000 feet AGL. So it's a two-tier wedding cake. The airports have control towers, radar approach control, certain number of IFR ops or passenger flights. So a couple little restrictions there that you can see. There's no specific pilot certification. Equipment that you have to have for Class C airspace would be a two-way radio and mode C transponder. The weather, this 3-152. Once again, this is talking about distance from clouds if you're VFR. Just don't care. For those of you that do or are kind of curious, the 3 is 3 miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, or I'm sorry, 1,000 feet below, 500 feet above, and 2,000 feet horizontally from any clouds. We just don't care as dispatchers. We put our planes through a lot worse. That's only for VFR traffic. All right, aircraft speed. Aircraft speed, max speed. 2,000 feet if you are at or below 2,500 feet AGL with within a 4 nautical mile radius of the Class C airport. And the charts you have to have on board, once again, don't care, but sectional, IFR en route, and TAC, if applicable. And that is what a Class C airspace looks like on our sectional. You're going to see the layers once again, just like on that last one. It's a little harder to see. Let's see if I can zoom in here. Okay, dead in the center of the screen, you'll see surface SFC to 4,100 feet. Then you'll see on that next tier, 1,400 feet to 4,100 feet, 1,400 feet to 1,900 feet on that side. So basically the important thing to remember is that the altitudes will be defined over that airport. Oh, this is Anchorage Airport. Cool. You can also see the magenta. You can see that shaded magenta line that runs through the terminal area, Class C altitudes on the far left side of the screen. That is the 4 nautical mile veil, is what we call it, a veil. That's the 4 nautical mile veil around the Classi Air Space. Then you can see the Classi Air Space defined with the bold magenta lines. Class D airspace. So Class D airspace, surface, once again, this is wrong. I don't know why this PowerPoint presentation is like this. This was written years ago and needs to be corrected. Class D airspace, surface to 2,500 feet, AGL, not MSL. Pilot certification, once again, not specific. You can have recreational pilots to air transport pilots, doesn't matter. Equipment, you're only required to have a two-way radio in this airspace. Weather, once again, don't care, but the 152, 3 miles visibility, 1,000 feet below, 500 above, 2,000 feet horizontal. Arrival through flight entry and departure requirements, you have to have two-way radio communication. So this is just talking about when you're coming in to land or take off from this airport, you need to make radio contact. We have what's called the Ctf frequency. You can see Anchorage Airport. You can't really see it actually. There's like this blue box next to the runways that you can see there in the center of the screen. Underneath that blue box, it will have frequencies for different, like the ATIS has a frequency for the ATIS. And then below that, you'll see a CTAF, CTAF. That stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. And what that CTAF is that's just a radio frequency that everybody that's in that airspace will tune into to talk. There's not always a tower controlling these airports once again. So if there's not a tower, or if the tower is not being manned when you're flying in these airspaces, you go to the Ctf frequency and just broadcast your position relative to the runway when you're flying through these airspaces, just so that the other pilots know where you are. And we commonly call that in the aviation business see and avoid. That's on the pilot to, if we're talking to each other, we're supposed to see and avoid each other as best as we can. Satellite airport, two-way radio communications when able. Minimum altitudes, large turbine airplanes, 1,500 feet AGL traffic pattern. So our standard traffic patterns are 1,000 feet above the surface of the runway. For the large turbine aircraft, they want them another 500 feet above your common traffic. Aircraft speed, once again, 200 knots or less at 2,500 feet or 2,500 feet or below AGL within a 4 nautical mile perimeter of the airport. And that's what your Class D airspace looks like on the sectional chart. Just a blue dotted line. You can see the frequency that I was talking about, the CT 118.35. That's the common traffic frequency. So I used to live there, Victorville. Talk about the armpit of the United States. All right, Class Bcd Air Spaces. It's talking about arrival through flight entry or departure. So you have to have two-way radio communication, satellite airport, two-way radio communications when available. So what it means by that, arrival through flight entry or departure requirements, as well, is if the airport is towered, has an air traffic controller sitting in a tower drinking coffee with his feet up on the desk, we have to announce our intentions to the air traffic controller for arrival or departure into the airspace. That's all that means. And if the tower's closed, like it says, the satellite airport, you just have to make two-way radio communication on that common traffic advisory frequency. Classi Air Spaces. This is basically just the fill all airspace. So we talk about it being up to the 18,000 foot Class A airspace. Well, where Class A airspace ends is 60,000 feet. So what's above Class A airspace? Class E. So if it's not defined as Class A, B, C, D, or G, it will always be Class E. So astronauts in outer space have to abide by Class E regulations, believe it or not. Right here it says 14,500 to 17,999 feet MSL, unless otherwise designated. Basically, it's everywhere, like I said before. And that's overlying the 48 states, including waters within 12 nautical miles and above flight level 600. So 60,000 feet. Types. Surface area airport contains all instrument approaches. Extensions to class Bcd contains all instrument. Yeah. Dumb. I am not. I need to redo this PowerPoint. I'm sorry. That's just gibberish. Okay, Federal Airways, 1,200 to 18,000 feet MSL, Classi Air Space. Offshore, specified altitude to 18,000 feet MSL beyond the 12 nautical miles of coast, Classi Air Space. So this is just kind of telling you where it's at. Just remember, it's everywhere that none of the other designated airspaces are. Charts that you need to have. Sectional terminal area, if applicable. World, I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but IFR high and low charts. Yeah. So Victor Airways.
The about it being gibberish, Garrett, is that we don't know the difference. So you're good.
Yeah, and this was written by a dispatcher that didn't have any flight training, so that's why some of it's just gibberish. These weren't written by Adam originally. Adam's altered some of them, but this one obviously didn't get touched. Anyways, yeah. Victor Airways, Classi Air Space, 1,200 feet AGL. So Victor Airways, like it's showing here, they are from 1,200 feet above the ground all the way up to that 17,999 feet, just under the Class A airspace. What it's showing here is from the VOR to VOR. Victor Airways, we showed you guys those. Those are the highways in the sky. Jet routes are freeways. Victor routes are like Bangor Highway, if you know the Salt Lake area. There's still stoplights, but they're few and far between. Anyways, what it's saying is that the Victor Airway extends 4 nautical miles on either side of the intended track. So basically they're 8 miles wide in total, but you will be in Class E airspace on a Victor Airway if you're within that 8 nautical miles and 1,200 feet to 1,800 feet and you're flying those highways in the sky. That's a Victor Airway. I feel like we've covered that pretty good so far in previous classes, but once again, there's no specific pilot certification required. The equipment need to have a mode C transponder to above 10,000 feet, not including at or below 2,500 feet, which we already talked about. There's no specific radio contact procedure when you're in Class E airspace. A lot of it's just that see and avoid. So once again, VFR weather minimums. Oh, and I had it backwards. 1,000 feet above, 500 below, 2,000 feet horizontal with 3 nautical miles visibility. Don't really care about VFR minimums. And believe it or not, like you have to, in pilot training, like we had to, this was so confusing to me. So, but we had to be able to like draw this out, and it sucked. brings back bad memories. All right. Once again, do not care about VFR weather minimums because we only fly IFR. Maximum speeds to remember: inside Class B airspace, 250 knots, under 200 knots. C and D, below 2,500 feet. AGL, within 4 nautical miles of the airport, 200 knots. And then below 10,000 feet, overall, 250 knots. So there is your crash course on A, B, C, D, E, and G airspaces. Class G airspace, there wasn't a slide for it, but actually there may be down a little bit lower, but I'll hold off on that comment just for a second. Special use airspace, so prohibited areas, just exactly what it says. You cannot fly in those areas. Areas that are prohibited areas are going to be areas like football stadiums during the Super Bowl, the White House, state capitol, national monuments. Those are prohibited areas. Restricted areas are going to be places like dugway proving grounds. These are areas where there's either going to be artillery firing, aerial gunnery, guided missiles, F-16s flying at you at 1,600 miles per hour, cramming the nose of their aircraft up your hiney. Like, bad places to be during certain times. That doesn't mean that we can't fly in those areas. It just means that we have to have authorization before we go in them. And then we have warning areas. And basically, this is anywhere that extends 3 nautical miles from our coastline. We also have these MOAs. So restricted airspaces and MOAs will typically be pretty much hand in hand. A lot of restricted airspaces that are being used for aerial gunnery and stuff like that. Those are going to be, there's going to be MOAs in those as well. MOAs, military operation areas, have defined vertical limits, vertical and lateral limits, and it just separates military and IFR traffic. So you can see there's restricted airspaces, dugway proving grounds. You'll see these 2 restricted airspaces, then you'll see these MOAs that connect the 2. That's what those areas are. Air traffic control routes IFR through inactive or around active military operations areas. VFR, you got to use extreme caution and contact the appropriate flight service station within 100 nautical miles for activity. So you can't just buzz in there. You have to have that authorization. Depicted on a sectional terminal area and low en route altitude chart. So those are the only places that you'll see those restricted airspaces. Alert areas. So these are areas of high volume pilot training or unusual aerial activities. So you can see up here on one of our previous slides, one of these alert areas. If you look over Atalanto on the bottom left side by Victorville, you can see a sailplane. That is an alert area. It's saying that there's gliders flying around that area. Controlled firing areas, once again, if there's any controlled firing areas, talking about rocket launches, anything like that, will have activities are suspended when the aircraft approach the area. So as we're approaching those areas, we got to make sure that they stop shooting. Other airspace areas, military training routes, MTRs. I'm sorry, that's the route that connects the different restricted routes around the dugway proving grounds, the MTRs. They consist of low altitude, high speed training routes. So they can be lower than 1,500 feet AGL, and depending on whether or not you're VFR or IFR. Higher than 1,500 feet for IFR, lower for VFR. They're also below 10,000 feet MSL. You're regularly going to see speeds in excess of 250 knots. Yeah, it's just for military planes buzzing between different restricted airspaces. So that's pretty much all you guys need to know about that. Other airspace areas. Airport advisory areas within 10 statute miles of an airport where a control tower isn't operating but where flight service station is located. Flight service stations just provide advisory services. So they're the guys if you need flight following, stuff like that. They typically are the guys that'll take care of that. Terminal radar services, or TERSAs, primary airports become Class D airspace. Remaining portion overlies other controlled airspace, normally Class E, beginning at 700 feet or 1,200 feet AGL. VFR pilots don't have to, but they're encouraged to participate in these. And they're depicted on VFR sectional charts, terminal area charts with solid black lines and altitudes. Holy smokes. So national security areas. Airspace that is defined with vertical and lateral limits, overlying locations requiring enhanced security. So they're very much so like one of our previous special use airspaces, these prohibited areas. Pilots have to avoid these areas. Flights may be temporarily prohibited, and yeah, you'll notice these pop up via NOTAM. Prohibited areas are permanent. National security areas can move around, and that's the only difference. Temporary flight restrictions established to protect persons, property in the air or on the surface, and provide safe environment for disaster relief, prevent unsafe congestion, and protect the president or vice president. Provide safe environment for space agency. These TFRs we see pop up a lot when we have VIP movement, when there's rocket launches, when there's Super Bowl, stuff like that. We'll see these TFRs pop up, and basically you have to have authorization to even fly into the area. So yeah, parachute jump, aircraft operation. So that's just exactly what it says, where they're jumping out of planes. Okay, Class G airspace. Let's talk about that real quick. Class G airspace, basically no requirements at all. Well, like I said before, very little. Just don't be stupid. That's pretty much what Class G airspace means. And that covers your airspaces just in time. Okay, that will do it. Once again, we'll hold off on the test or on this quiz to Monday. Please study those notes. If you're not going to be here tomorrow, please, please, please study the notes that you took for the review. Super, super important. If you study those notes, you'll do just fine. If you make stuff up, like, that's where problems start happening. You know, write the way I told you to write it down. That's what we want to see on the test. So, or something pretty close, but yeah. Other than that,
Be sure to shoot me that email, please.
yeah, I'll get that over to you.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yep. Any other questions or anything we can take care of before we call it a night?
So on the test on Monday, are we basically getting it emailed to us and then we're typing our essay answers out, or are we printing it off and writing the answers out and then scanning it in and emailing it back to you? How do you want it done?
Whatever is easiest for you.
Okay. All
go
right.
for it. You can even take a picture of it and with your phone and email it to me. Either way, however you want to get it to me. I'm going to set it up to where I'm emailing you guys personally. Last class, we had a couple people that replied all to my email that I sent out. I just don't want anybody to, you know, feel embarrassed or anything because they sent it out to everybody. You know, I want to keep it just as professional and quiet as a regular college classroom. So I will set it up to where each one of you receives an individual email, and then you can either print it out, take a picture of it, send it back to me, or you can edit the document and send it back. So. Any other questions? All righty. I will call it a night then.
Thanks, Garrett. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Night.
Night.